And we're live. Hello.
Hello, Robyn. Happy
Hello,
Thanksgiving.
Stephen. Oh, happy Thanksgiving to you. Did you have a nice time?
Yes, it was great. So, family ate a lot of pie, and now it's holiday music, carefully created, and now it's being played. So lots of waitresses Christmas rapping, because one of my
Oh
favorites.
God, I am terrified of that song, and it gives me I hate it so much. I hate it so much. It gives me
I
terrible, the worst flashbacks to people throwing things at me. Um,
well
like,
that is unpleasant. You don't want no one wants to have stuff thrown at them. But I am sort of a kid of the '80s, so all those songs are of
oh no, I'm
emotion.
just a former bald employee, so it's like I hear Christmas songs and I'm like, I have a gun to my head. Like the only ones that are acceptable are ones that they were not playing in either Charlotte Russe or Contempo Casuals in the late 90s. Um, yes, I worked at Contempo Casuals. I know that there are some that's completely dating myself very specifically. Like
So
I
speaking of
also worked at Wet Steel. I worked at it changed from Contempo Casuals to Wet Steel while I was working there. So
Yes, well, speaking of somewhat, I guess, legalized guns to heads, can you walk us through what's happening with the Supreme Court and reproductive freedom and so forth?
well, it's basically going away. Although, I I feel like there's a very, very, very almost I feel like there's not much chance that it's going to that they're going to keep it. But at the same time, I keep thinking that it's not the sad thing is that it's not going to change much because so many of these states have put so many restrictions on abortion and made it so impossible to get them for so many years that a very, very large abortion is not accessible right now to a
Mhm.
very large number of women, both for geographic and financial reasons. And it's going to be bad, but it's not going to, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but it's not going to be bad for people like me, a white lady who lives in blue states. It's going to be bad for the people who it's currently bad for. It will be slightly worse, and that really sucks. And so, really, what we need to be looking at is, codifying it into the law rather than having it hanging by a thread constantly, as is the case with Roe, because you know with Roe, it was always like it could happen. It could happen any moment. And I feel like we need something more secure than that in general. It would be very lovely if we could pass the Women's Health Protection Act. But unfortunately, we have Manchin and Bob Casey who are like, how about we don't do literally anything? So,
uh, and the what's the risk in even in the quote unquote blue states with because nothing's certain. Some Democratic
mhm.
states like Massachusetts have Republican governors, and also
Oh, for sure.
Republicans
We had Mitt Romney there when I was living there.
and Republicans are pretty aggressive. So we might have kind of had a Manchin Semina blockade on passing
Mhm.
voting rights, but I don't see any such scruple amongst Republicans. So if they regain the Senate, what are the chances of an actual federal ban on
Uh,
abortion?
Honestly, I don't know, but there's literally nothing that I would put past them.
Mhm.
Like, I don't think that there's oh no, we wouldn't go that far kind of thing as far as they're concerned. And I remember for years there was always the argument that, oh, Republicans don't actually want um Roe to go away because that's what they campaign on, from so many men.
So many.
It was always men, they're like, it's never going to happen. They don't care, they don't actually care. They just know that their voters care. And that hasn't, maybe it was the case with the first Bush, who was originally pro-choice, but it has not been the case for a very long amount of time. And yeah.
I keep seeing that, and it's infuriating. It's profoundly untrue. It is the theory. It's not a comic book fan, but it's sort of the from the Dark Knight when he talks. The Joker describes himself as someone who just grabs. He doesn't know what he would do.
Mhm.
Well, he just does things. So if he grabs like the car, he's not gonna. What would I do with it? I caught it, and that's not how the right has had a specific. And I mean, again, I think the men you've talked about have not written it this way, but a specific strategy to ending women's women's rights, and not to exclude, but everyone is pregnant who would get pregnant. But specifically, I say women's rights in the sense of for the longest that was a pillar
Yeah.
towards women's freedom.
Well, because
And
a very large portion of it is, I mean, yes, and people of any gender can get pregnant, but there is that like, it's a very there's a cultural component to it too, where there are frankly a lot of men who are super weird and Christian who are like, no, we don't want women working, we don't want women having multiple boyfriends before they get married, we don't we like we want that sort of like what they think the 1950s were. They want women who don't really have a lot of rights and who are going to stay at home and take care of them and their kids, and that's what they want. And so they're still mad about the sexual revolution, like
oh yeah,
like constant, they're like, I blame everything on the sexual revolution. And it always comes down to that. It always comes down to wanting to control like women or people who are identified at birth as women. Like that's the goal, more so than they care about fetuses, which they don't.
No, they don't. Well, it's always the people you see. You'd written about Madison Cawthorn, but then Madison Cawthorn, Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Green, Laura Ingraham, like people who present such overt contempt for human beings, living human, the complete hatred they have for anyone, to then suddenly there's somehow this one area where they love children. Like he's Mr. Rogers, whereas that's not consistent with everything he's ever said about anything. So like Rush Limbaugh was like when he coined feminazi, which is someone who he was a bully and a horrible person. And so somehow we're supposed to think that he's perhaps from a legitimate place losing sleep over the loss of, Republicans who talk about, wiping out nations our way and everything and bombing, cities are somehow like, oh my God, I can't sleep because women are having like these fetuses.
I mean, if they care so much about life, they'd support universal health care. Like, I'm sorry, like,
yeah,
it's very obvious. Like, they're like, I don't care who lives or dies generally, except for this one fetus or
go hand in hand, right? Because
it's
very expensive to give birth.
My
wife and I were
privileged. It's extremely expensive to give birth.
It's incredibly expensive, and I always felt like, do they think that it's just like when Jennifer Aniston was pregnant on Friends, you put the little thing on and it's annoying for like 9 months? It's like, no, you are making deliberate, like to maintain prenatal health is a tremendous, burden on, and I don't mean burden and like, oh,
I know what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying. Like, it's a financial burden. It's like a burden on your, personal health and how you feel. I mean, sometimes things that you want and are good can have side effects that are not great. Like, I'm currently a little bit loopy because of I got my booster shot yesterday. So if I say anything stupid, we're blaming that.
Yeah, that's consistent with so Amy Coney Barrett with let them get abortion, let them eat cake moment, have adoption. It's like the idea of like, oh well, what's the harm?
Adoption is expensive.
Never thought about it before. Like, well, no, it's such an insane idea. It's just sort of, well, why can't they just sever the parental rights? It's no big, right? And I'm like, oh my God, you're a sociopath. You have no, and this
Yeah.
is a person who's been a mother, I presume, so she would understand that it's a tremendous cost. And I think you and I had discussed this of like, I'm sure any woman in her employ, like say a house cleaner
Oh,
or
yes.
hairstylist, who's like, oh, I can't work for you for the next 6 months because my job is physically demanding or on my feet, and I
Mhm.
can't do this now. She would totally be okay. That job is, even if it's an inconvenience to myself, I'm holding that job for you, as opposed to saying, go F yourself, I'm going to get someone else. And this person now has to
Mhm.
figure out what to do. It is just nuts. But as someone has written, it kind of goes to this idea from people like Barrett of essentially, and you'd written with Cawthorn, the vessels. So this poor person or whatever, you just churn out the baby, that's, you know, whatever, and who cares what happens to you, and we're not going to hold you accountable to what happens to the child later. Go and
Especially in Mississippi, where, they have a very high maternal mortality rate
mhm.
and a very high infant mortality rate. So,
Yeah, it just seems like you should probably work on ensuring that will wanted pregnancies survive before
mhm.
demanding more unwanted. If I could go
What do you
back,
think?
yeah, if I could go back to the thing of what you were saying about the men talking about Republicans didn't want this, or what seems insane about that to me is that we have in living time an example of an issue greatly affecting us where Republicans have won. Republicans have won on guns. No matter how
Mhm.
many kids get shot, no matter whatever, Republicans have won on guns. So they're going to be all these guns. They're going to pose with guns in their holiday cards. They've won.
Mhm. I
And
still can't get over that. I mean, I see them every year, but like, damn them in their timing. Like they're
pro life, baby. So, and they run on, and they make tons of money. The NRA funds them on the whole thing of Democrats are coming for your guns, even though they aren't. And so,
Mhm.
all that's going to happen is Republicans will now win on abortion, and they will run and campaign on the argument that Democrats are going to come kill babies. They're going to come
Mhm.
kill the babies again. And just like with, after Sandy Hook or after this most recent incident or any incident where, Democrats very sheepishly are like, come on, can we just pass something, maybe something? So no
Mhm.
matter how many, people are impacted negatively by these abortion laws or abortion ban,
Mhm.
it'd be the same thing. It's like, oh, come on, like surely a rape and incest exception, surely. And then suddenly, and Republicans will block that, saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, you're going to come for all the babies." Then afterward, similar to
Mhm.
guns, the same thing. It's like, "Oh, come on, you're reasonable people. Surely you'll let us, we can have an assault weapon ban, right?" And then Lindsey Graham is talking about, no, no, that woman who was only able to shoot her burglar. Well, he was bleeding out on the floor, but he could have like killed her at the last minute. If you ever seen a horror movie, the dying, and that is a
Yeah.
legitimate concern if you've seen horror movies, the last gasp. My mother trained me, just don't lock the door. Don't stay in the room with them. Don't look at
Yeah.
them.
No.
Just kind of let that happen. Let him bleed out. Don't like
Yeah.
poke around, but like,
Yeah.
but
No,
the
get
he should
people
be.
in horror movies and also Lifetime movies are not terribly swift as a rule.
They aren't particularly very bright. So yeah, it is astonishing to me. And a lot of women I respect on Twitter have said to this, please start hiring more women, more minorities, or
Mhm.
whatever. Because I mean, not that I think as a black man I'm somehow smarter than, but most black guys who I follow, who like Eli Mistol and whatever, have all been,
Mhm.
yeah, Republicans have wanted this. This is part of their white supremacist agenda, and I think that's part of it.
They
Yeah,
don't have stars in their eyes over, the magical reasonable Republicans as much
yes, it's sort
as
of
like the white male pundits do. And, you know, it is yeah, like I've just been shocked this week by like all of the ostensibly liberal men being like, let me tell you about this guy who knows all about abortion laws, and he's really an expert. And he says that Wisconsin, I'm talking about Josh Marshall, but like Wisconsin and all these other states will immediately ban abortion because they have trigger laws and abortion bans on the books right after Roe. I had no idea. And I'm like, really? You didn't? Because like we've been talking about this for since I've been on the internet, which was a very long time ago.
You've written about this. You've written about this.
I mean, like Robyn Marty, who's, you know, my favorite other Robyn, like it's her and Robyn from Potomac, but who are the best Robyns now. But she literally worked for Talking Points Memo writing about this shit. And she's like, you know, I would say one of the #1 experts in all of this, never mind Eric, whoever Eric is. I can't remember who Eric is. But like, it's even like, you know, the Chris Hayes thing where he's like, you know, oh, I didn't mean it as like a big revelation. It's just like, it feels very, when it's something that has been, you've been writing about and talking about and yelling about forever, seeing it like be like restated by some guy as like, well, I never thought of it this way, but probably people won't be able to get abortions if Roe is overturned.
Well, and I think what's frustrating is I'm all for giving people, we've discussed this and we can discuss this on down the line regarding some of the reaction we've seen this week. I'm all for giving people off ramps for bad decisions because if they don't, then what's the incentive for them to change? But
for sure,
what needs to be acknowledged, at least at this level, is that your frankly stupidity on this is what got us to this issue. So this idea, by helping, you're able to let Republicans have this heist because they were under the illusion of like, well, of course, this won't result in the end of abortion. They're just doing this or whatever. That's how they campaign, creates a sense of a mission structure and a complacency. You know, that, you know, if I've already said, you know, Roe v. Wade is only about as old as I am. And I'm not, I'd like to think I'm not that ancient. It's like only, you know, it's only been, I think it's a year older than I am, which is not, you know, to treat it as this set in stone forevermore law, even though it's been under assault for 40 years or more, is crazy to me. And when you compare that to just more recently, the last election, so you know, not just Biden, but every Democrat was getting hit on, oh, well, what about DC statehood? DC statehood, Puerto Rico, are you going to like do that? Do you support court packing? As though, you know, this kind of idea that, oh my God, my children might live in a world of 12 Supreme Court justices. It's like they, you know, the press was escalating this sense of dramatic change. And then every Republican who won or beat a Democratic incumbent down the ticket in 2020 was able to be like, I'm life, nothing but life for me, life's wonderful, life's great, and never challenged on what that is in drawing a scary line to a scary narrative. And the media might say Democrats are not great at wanting to draw that scary line, a scary narrative, because they are certainly, when you have Tim Kaine on your ticket instead of, say, as I like to say, Cecil Richards or Wendy Davis or any woman been an actual activist for the cause, because that to me, when you have Mike Pence on one corner, you know, the mirror image, the person battling it should be an abortion rights activist, maybe, as opposed to someone who's kind of like at the same country club as Mike Pence, but like, okay, well, maybe we can let the ladies have abortion, you know, even though it's disgusting and terrible, I feel bad about it, but maybe that's not necessarily a compelling argument for a human rights issue. The other, what do you think about, it always also stunned me when, again, I guess the dude pundits will do this as well, and others, of like, well, it's a healthcare issue, and then are surprised that Republicans, specifically even Republican women, don't care that poor people would not have access to healthcare. I mean, that's kind of
so weird.
That's so weird. That's what they do.
They don't care in literally any other situation. Like they're like, oh, you know, like you were saying earlier, like, oh, a poor woman dies of cancer. That's just, you know, that's fine. She can't get any treatment. But then we're supposed to like expect them to be like, oh my God, I didn't realize that like poor women or women, like any women might die or might, be otherwise fucked. Health wise, like it's like, of course they don't care. They don't care about anything. They don't care about like, the fetuses the second they're born. They don't care if they get health care.
Yeah.
Like,
And
they just.
And can we talk? I feel like it's specifically Roberts might be leading it to the perfect trap, which is, oh, we haven't overturned Roe v. Wade. It's like much like he did with the Voting Rights Act. It's gutted, and what that does is that it then becomes, which Democrats would be scared crapless about, is that it becomes a very clear class issue, because you said, women like yourself will still have access. So it's kind of what he'll say is wink, wink, abortion's still available, which would then require Democrats from Biden down at the level to will know, specifically now it's a class issue. They can't make it a larger, and it is a human rights issue, and it's a human rights issue if it only affects poor people, but making it so overtly a liberal issue that I think, especially going to 2022, I feel Democrats will be much more skittish about, given how this kept going down. But what do you think of that possibility?
I mean, it's difficult. Like, I think in some ways there's a benefit to like, the like people assuming that it actually will affect all women because they're more likely to yell about it if they think it's going to actually affect them. But at the same time, I do like, I don't, it's probably not true. And just like everything else, the people who are going to get hurt are the most vulnerable. And I'm worried that people are going to be like, oh, well, that ended and I'm still fine. I can still get an abortion. And be like, oh, well, other people must also be able to, figure stuff out probably.
Yeah,
and, the thing is, we get inured to things very quickly. Like, and like to the point where like, people just become accustomed to things and they're like, oh, well, we'll just do it this way. And,
it's about the personal, very much the personal issue, and their ability to muddy that gray area, because then it would mean, all of us, but Democrats specifically, arguing on behalf of these poor women. And as we say, not the quote unquote best victims, right? The victims they want to be able to be is this nice young girl who was going to go to college, that type of story, right? White lady's going to, and that, what you're saying, potentially those ladies might be fine, or they'll be able to travel, they'll be whatever. So the victim's going to be people who
have less of a voice.
Yes. And
and those are the people who, quite frankly, don't have access to abortion right now, even with Roe. And,
we should have been
part of the reason Chris Hayes was getting dragged was because he said like, oh, they're going to, start like, chipping away at abortion rights in every single state. And everyone was like, they've been doing that. Like they've literally been doing that for, many, many years, ever since they sort of discovered that they could, and they could get away with it.
Well, so like we've got, I think it would be rare. Obviously they say there's gun shops in every quote unquote red state, that, more so than a grocery store. But even in blue states, it's unlike, that gets slapped down very quickly. Like even when Heller came out of DC of like, okay, we're going to pass very restrictive laws or scale back. There has been activism for gun rights in ways that have necessarily not been widespread activism on abortion rights. As you're saying, it's more we should have been spending the past few time, perhaps, actively talking about expanding abortion rights. But instead, since safe, legal, and rare from 92, that is not, obviously you don't want to expand it. You want to be like, oh, that's great that maybe things are shutting, which this is this horrible last resort type rhetoric as it's being chipped around you. And as you've always said, you don't get any prizes or points for catering to Republicans in this case. So in every instance, you'd written about this, I think, with Ralph Northam when he had been inelegantly talked about perhaps late term or abortions and post viability.
Mhm.
And that felt like, again, that was an area where Republicans were going to turn up the heat, use, a lot of ridiculous verbiage and terminology, and
Mhm.
put Democrats on the defensive. So you got a lot of, oh, well, that is terrible, but here's this and here's that type of arguments.
The
And
thing you need to realize is that Republicans don't go on the fence.
Mhm.
Like, they're not going on the fence, so like we should not go on the fence either, But go ahead, sorry.
Well, no,
Talking.
they're very defense, and to your that kind of created this sense of, again, being on abortion rights, it being about allowing them to paint it as killing babies or killing getting them in that area. And it was very clear, again, what their goal was, chip away, chip away, chip away. And so kind of here, and again, here we are. If I could ask you again about there's also similar to, I guess, a lot of male pundits have been saying that there's going to be this tremendous backlash as a result of a ban. As you're saying, it's been somewhat muddied. For example, in Virginia, there was a great white lady backlash, especially specifically non-college educated, college educated white women on
Yeah.
Twitter love to kind of, that they ain't us whenever that comes up. But
Yeah.
ultimately, though, collectively, white women went from supporting Biden and Democrats in 2020 to Younging by 10 points. And so, white men remained kind of awful, but percentage-wise, as far as voting for Trump. But
I do think people were very much pushing the narrative that, like, well, what really matters is that they're polite and personable, and as long as that's what's going on, then that's fine. Like, they're if they're really polite, they're not going to come for your abortion rights or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and
Like, they won't do anything too bad.
Well, and that's what frustrates me, because when everyone's like, Hillary sounded alarm about Trump and about Trumpism, and yes, and I respect that. I think it's very important to say when Nancy Pelosi, when Obama, when Hillary are talking about Trump, they were talking about an existential, dangerous threat, like he's going to switch off, ignite a nuke for kicks type of thing, and not necessarily. It somewhat frustrates me when we get these decisions and the idea is that, oh, Hillary and Democrats warned you about this specifically, because it's like, no, this is what's happening, would have happened if your buddy, because some of these same people they love to talk about how these are good Republicans who they would have, I've seen it. I could have slept at night if it was Romney or Bush or McCain, but Trump is so dangerous. Like, well, maybe, but Romney would have nominated.
He was very like, oh man, at least he's picking some really great judges. Like, that was their whole thing. Like, they kept saying, like, all of the reasonable Republicans were saying, well, we don't like how he is, but like, he is picking some really good judges, and so we'll commend him on that. And what they mean by that is that they are judges who are, going to be hostile both to reproductive choice and voting rights and, pretty much anything else that is good.
Exactly. And it's important to make that distinction, I think, because everyone's like, there's a tweet of Hillary Clinton saying, the next person could appoint for a judge. And that's true. But at the time, the idea, and this is again the media being part of that, was like, oh, Trump's nuts. He's going to pick Jeanine Pirro for the Supreme Court. Like that.
For Judge Judy.
Exactly. Like absurd stuff. And then when he kind of brought in the Federalist Society centerfolds, everyone's like, oh, he's normal. He's making normal Republican choices. And that is hard for Republicans to, you saw them kind of lay down, Democrats rather, they laid down a bit with Tony Barrett. They got cowed because they were like, oh, her crazy religion, she's crazy, we can't go after her because that would be mean. and we can't really go after her that hard. That'd be so mean. And so they were kind of, all they could do was protest the rules. Oh, it's so unfair that Trump nominated someone 8 minutes before the election, which is all right. Well,
It's
that's
like,
all you can do instead of going after her specifically.
anyone who thought they were going to like abide by their own rules, like I don't know how to help them. Like I can't help you. Like
it is, yeah. I mean, and that's what I was hearing. Cory Booker was talking about it. Well, this is so unfair or whatever. It's like no one cares about that. You need to talk about how she's effing crazy, but you can't beat up on the white lady. I get that. That's tough, and that's why they're laughing at you. Whereas if this was a different situation, a Democratic president, it's a Black lesbian liberal, they would crush her and without hesitation. But yes, this notion.
Oh yeah, they would absolutely, like, they have no problem like portraying every Democrat, including like the super normal regular ones, as like crazy communists who are, going to communist you, even though we don't know what communism is. It'll be bad. Like,
but yeah, but going back to, I mean, Amy Coney Barrett, I mean, that was the tough part because, and as someone suggested, she's probably, if any sort of opinion is gutting Roe, she will write, because that's part of the plan.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The face, because it's very hard. I think Republicans they love to put Democrats in a situation of like, well, if you like women, why don't you like this woman? You say you're a feminist. I mean, part of it is sort of like, I think feminists and even in civil rights, we need to be upfront about saying, no, this is overtly a liberal thing. Yes.
Yeah.
Or I don't, because I think they're afraid of saying, oh no, that makes it seem unfair. It's like, no, because if we're just about powerful women, so why can't we support, why can't you be cool about Sarah Huckabee Sanders? Well, she's terrible. And so a woman being the first of something and being terrible at it, or a Black person being the first and being really hostile to other Black people is not, I mean, ultimately, I would think feminism, civil rights, it's collective. It's like about the least.
No, it's about lifting everyone else up. It's not about like, oh, hey, one woman got to be a CEO. Guess things are okay for all of us now. And, there are I get that there are like a lot of women who, generally believe this, and like, it's like they want to just like do the whole like girl power thing. What if feminism was just girl power, like the Spice Girls? People would like it, and it wouldn't be hostile or scary, and it could be nice. And like what I was writing about last week with the lady in the New York Times, or last week or the week before, who was all on about like, why can't anti-choice ladies be feminists too? Because we would, like to go like, you go girl or whatnot.
Well, it's like someone. Do you remember the show with about Phyllis Schlafly with Kate Blanchett? And
yeah, Mrs. America.
It was like, this is a feminist show, like this character, because her drive for power.
Oh yeah. Oh God, I forgot. Yes.
I was like, no, she's horrible, a horrible human being, played by one of the most wonderful people in the world. Yes, yeah. But Kate Blanchett. We want to talk about Kate Blanchett, we'll do that. But like, no, like Phyllis Schlafly is evil and terrible. So part of it is the challenge that Republicans love exploiting, because ultimately, if you look at the electorate and the data, more people who look like me vote for pro-choice candidates and policies than people who look like you. Like, a lot of Amy Coney Barrett. There are a lot of Amy Coney Barretts, perhaps even you could say a majority of white women electorate. And so that goes back to this idea that there's going to be this huge swing like we saw in Virginia. Because if you did have, like, if white women were so horrified by this, by what was occurring, if Roe got gutted, in theory, 10-point swing, similar to what we saw in Virginia, that youngling, that means we win. Oh, we flip Ohio, we flip Pennsylvania, we win
Mhm.
in Florida, and we hold Arizona and Georgia. But it's not going to happen, is it, Robyn? Do you?
Probably not. Like, they're chipping away at voting rights. They're chipping away at like really, this is our last stand to some degree. I hate to be like a fatalist or whatever, but like it really is. This is like when everything is on the line. We have a majority. We're probably not going to have a majority again very soon. And, the only way to get shit done is to get shit done. And you don't see any, like, you don't see any Republicans going around being like, oh, well, we have to play by the rules or else the Democrats won't play by the rules next.
No. Well,
Like they don't
yeah,
they don't care. They don't it's very the ends justifies the means. And I get that people feel like, well, if we go the ends justify the means, then we're just as bad as them. And no, you're not. Like that's not true.
That's Terry Canfield, whose theory is that democracy only works if we are all, Democrats have to do democracy, implying that if we played by Republican rules, then the whole country is anti-democratic again. Well, but unfortunately, Republicans, if we don't play, we get slaughtered. If only one side understands it's a war, it's not a war, it's a massacre.
Yeah.
And as Caitlin at Day Magazine wrote. And so this idea that also, if Republican strategies are inherently anti-democratic, and I would argue that what McConnell playing hardball is not like attacking Congress is off the hook, right? Like calling people saying find extra votes. It's ridiculous. But I have no problem saying if I was president in if I was heading the Senate and had control of the Senate as a Democrat in an election year and RBG had died instead of Scalia, I'd be like, yeah, you're not filling that seat. I have the ability to block your crazy right-wing choice, and I'm going to block it and hope that Hillary will win and we'll appoint someone normal. And the idea so that was frustrated me when Democrats were like talking about some sense of fairness. It was like, there's no sense of fairness. Like what he did actually, the reason he suffered no, and people whine about this, like McConnell suffered no because he believed in something. He laughs about it and laughs about it at meetings. Yes, because he knows his supporters are like, yeah, I stopped them from getting the baby killer on the Supreme Court. And instead we got, Amy Coney Gorsuch and then later Kavanaugh and Amy Coney, like we believe in something and we've been achieving towards it. And so I don't playing hardball is in the interest of democracy is a bad thing. Being like a chump, hugging Lindsey Graham, like Dianne Feinstein, it's like, oh, what a nice little like it's a board meeting at an arts theater or something, right? Like what a nice board meeting this was. Lady, they put this lady on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Life. She's younger than I am. Like she's gonna be around for a while.
Yeah.
It's just this ridiculous kind of and as you were saying, our last stand, to me, I got so much grief when I said like it's most likely that we will not, here's what particularly going to happen, and we should act as if we're going to lose power in 2022. Yeah. Everyone was kind of, you're being fatalist. You're just being fatalist for clicks, which is one of my least favorite things I've seen you get. That
which is also bullshit now, and I would really like people to like, oh my God, no one is getting paid by clicks anymore. That's like very like 5 years ago. Like it's not a thing. Most sites, like advertisers don't pay anything now. It's why we're, all like donation, quite frankly, which like, donate to Wonkette. Monthly donations are super great. We love you for them. But like, no one does that. Oh my God, it's not a thing. Like people aren't getting paid per click. That's not a thing. And if you don't like paywalls, shut up about the fucking clicks. Yeah, sorry, I got into a fight yesterday. Like
about the pay. Yeah, our and for anyone watching, if Robyn and I write something for Wonkette that pisses you off, it is actually our opinion. It's not that we need attention or that we're trying to get clicks or hate reads or whatever. This is just, we have opinions and this is our opinion. It's sort
Yeah.
of, you know, uh, and so that's like very, yes, it is very frustrating. But again,
People
we
also have no idea. I will say this, I just have to interject, because like I did work at sites where, that were based on advertising. And so like, yes, getting a lot of clicks was sort of important. So yes, sometimes we would write things that weren't like what we necessarily wanted to be able to write in order to like have jobs. But most of the things that, got huge amounts of traffic were not like clickbait or what people would think they were. Our most popular article every day, the entire time that I worked there, was an article from several years ago that the title of it was basically just like, other reasons you might be pregnant, other reasons you're missing your period and are not pregnant, other than being pregnant. That, and a thing I wrote on, albaline as a, like, which is a makeup remover. Like, it's not what people think it is. It's not like outrage. It's not really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I resent that as well. I've seen that also, of like, when we're upset about something or passionate about something, we're just fueling outrage. Because if we were rational and sane, we would understand that this is why Merrick Garland is taking a long time to do anything. And even though Adam Schiff and others have expressed concerns, we should not criticize him. If we're outraged about anything about the Democrats are doing, or in any way critical, even though we were told, like, the whole point was that you can't argue if you don't have a seat at the table, right? That's what you should throw your vote away on third parties. And then once that happens, then it's like, well, no, you should shut up and not have any opinions. But no, this is not outrage. It's just like expressing an opinion. And again, our outrage isn't going to stop people from voting. So we're not stopping people from voting by saying this is our last stand. We're just recognizing it's kind of like in war. The idea is like, you've only got so much ammunition, people are coming. Maybe you do all you can, and it's your last stand, and that allows you to win later or something. But the idea of like, oh, well, we need to hold on to our ammunition right now because then we can get reinforcements to make Manchin and Cinema irrelevant. We can get reinforcements down the road. And it's like, well, we're going to be dead by then, and we won't get those reinforcements. I mean, that's sort of the vicious circle that keeps coming around. When Cinema was more upset that Nancy Pelosi might have delayed her bill way back when, and she had plenty of things to say in the press about that, has nothing to say about abortion rights. And this is a woman who abortion rights groups, because it's insane. It's insane. Try to imagine Marco Rubio, like, literally the potential that guns would be banned and Marco Rubio not saying anything, just posting stuff about his latest bipartisan project. That's inconceivable. And, the fact that Dick Durbin annoyed me with his constant stuff about this is a constitutional right. It's like, what? Well, yes. He reminded me of there's the play Noises Off, where everything's kind of going to hell. And the one actor, despite everything going to hell around her, she's still reciting the lines as memorized. So it's like, it doesn't make any sense because the whole theater's on fire. And she's like, and now I'm here and in the door. And then so it's like, constitutional right, retweet if you agree. Oh my God. The senator's like, retweet if I agree. I do agree it's constitutional right, but they're taking it will not be for much longer. And you need to actively do something. And call out the fact that Republicans are stripping away reproductive freedom. Don't say the Senate needs to do its job and protect reproductive freedom. It's like, okay, well, Republicans elected and sent these people. Why do you think Josh Haley is there? His job is to take away. That's his job. That's how he sees his job. So when you talk about, that was the hashtag when McConnell was blocking
to do your job.
Do your job. It's like, well, but they are doing their job. That's what they're going to tell their constituents. I'm keeping Obama from appointing. So there's this sense of, I think, a disconnect as to what this Republican plan is, and this idea that there's going to be this tremendous outrage or that could be leveraged on, we really need to figure out a better way of communicating. And I would think we need more abortion rights activists, specifically the people who would be most affected by this, women specifically,
Mhm.
making a point, arguing this point. And I feel like that's our disadvantage. We can't, Republicans, Marjorie Taylor Greene is the electorate, and she
Oh
goes
yeah.
out, she's saying what the electorate feels. And Democrats have to kind of like, it's filtered through 18 shades of focus
Mhm.
group, and there's no passion or anger to it. And they say, well, what's anger without a strategy? It's like, well, part of it is communicating a threat effectively.
Mhm.
And that's not necessarily happening. And you've got to like really, that's my fear, I guess,
Well,
is
clearly, if every, male pundit on earth was like, I had no idea that getting rid of Roe v. Wade would lead to there not being abortions for people.
yeah, well,
No.
you should have, like Chris Hayes and others should have
Yeah.
really, this is what this means if this woman is nominated. And then maybe it's confirmed. Because what happens is the media, people like Chris Hayes and others makes it so that the people screaming the loudest, the people, are the activists. And
Mhm.
Democrats are already somewhat scared of their activist base. They're embarrassed by their activists.
Yeah.
Now, the one sort of approved bit of activism was from among Democrats was the Women's March,
Mhm.
predominantly because they were the polite women, the police officers were
Yeah.
giving high fives and stuff like that. And, you know, if we saw more of that, would that make a difference? Who knows? I don't right now though, I feel like we're in a situation where I think you and I talked about this of like, okay, well, what would that women's march have been if Trump had known? Because he hated that. He hated anyone obviously, raining
Mhm.
on
Yeah.
parade. If he had known, it's like, oh right, I could just send my droogie counter protesters to it. And and how many women would not have gone to that, knowing there's going to
Yeah.
be a bunch of Rittenhouses counter protesting armed at the women's march.
Yeah. That would have been very different. Yeah.
Yeah, people would not have shown up. And that was what's so frustrating about the Rittenhouse case is like
Mhm.
what you're encouraging is a sobering effect of the free exercise of amendment rights,
Mhm.
because people who don't bring guns, sensible people, I mean, not even just women, man, a lot of people are like, I'm not going to go to that. I don't want to get, like, I could die and he's going to walk. Not that I necessarily, I'm still dead either way, but
Yeah.
it'd be nice that the person who killed me was prosecuted for it. So I
Yeah.
think that, we're already at a sense of where activism needs to speak. And I mean, I get the sentiment of Obama's don't boo vote. I believe you should vote, but I
Also
get,
boo.
yes. Well, my fear is that boo is tamping down on anger. I feel like that as Republicans don't do that. They soak up the dark
Yeah.
side, right? Soak up the boos, because when you're like, yeah, let's do it, let's channel this and go. But when it's kind of like tut tut tut,
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily speak to the sense of, yes, you should be booing Nazis, you should be booing bad people, you should go to the streets and but that's when they lectured Maxine Waters about being
Yeah.
confrontational, about being, well, how should we react to people who take away your reproductive freedom? You should go and like you should wrap that gift for Amy Coney
Yeah.
Barrett who comes in your store. You should, give her a great cocktail, because freedom and democracy, despite what this person's doing to
Mhm.
you. And Republicans don't operate that way. I mean, you see that now, where everything they feel that's being done to them, being vaccines or whatever, they're very
Oh
open
yeah,
about.
no, they're constant victims. Speaking of protests, one thing that I was gonna bring up is, did you see the video of the freaking Patriot Front people
Oh yeah.
yesterday? So right now, like today, all of the Republicans are going, no, they're secretly Antifa. They're trying to make patriots look bad. And, they're just going to keep repeating this despite the fact that, like, we know who Thomas Rousseau is. Like, we know, like, Patriot Front. We know what they do, how they started. To clarify, they branched out from Vanguard America after Vanguard America's name was somewhat tarnished during Charlottesville when what's his face ran over James Alex Fields Jr. ran over a woman and killed her. So we know exactly who they are. We know who's in it. We know who's involved, and they're all like, "Nope, that's not us. That's Antifa trying to make us look bad." And it feels fair. Like no matter what happens that makes them look bad, they're like, "Nope, that's someone else trying to make us look bad," and they take no ownership of it whatsoever.
No, yeah, we saw that with like the police reform, where I've written something about this, where cops are openly lying about rising homicide as a result of police defunding, which hasn't occurred. There was, and even to the extent that any might have occurred, we're talking about 2020, a year where municipal budgets were destroyed because of COVID. So something's going to have to give. But cops refuse to even, give even a little bit. But to me, it's a sort of, if there's also conservatives would never bend on this. Like if public schools, they got like art and music defunded at public schools, they would never then say like, oh yeah, well, liberals would say like, oh yeah, that's why people can't do math because there's no longer a drama club. It's like, well, that doesn't have any comparison. So now he's like,
music, I would actually argue, is very helpful for math.
I do as well.
I'm just as terrible at music theory as I am at math. I don't understand calculus, and I don't understand the circle of fifths.
You don't know you don't have perfect pitch.
You know what? I actually do not. My mom did, which was like kind of frustrating. But like, no, I mean, I can sing. I just, actual music theory is confusing to me, or it was when I was 17 and had to take a music theory class. Like,
yeah, I'm always more shocked that someone can write something without reading music. So, because I guess academically, I understand.
Oh, I can read music. I just don't understand like certain things.
Yeah, like people who
I can cite.
There's notes, and notes translate to something. You write it down as notes. But when I ever see someone who's like, yeah, Jimi Hendrix couldn't read music, I'm like, what? But then he's like just playing around on a guitar, and then like also like all choreography that's essentially just demonstrated by my most recent show. I saw the choreographer comes in, works with some people, and they've picked it up and do it. I was like, how did you? I mean, fortunately, you can now record it. It's wonderful. You know, watch it as video later. But I'm stunned by that. But it's just this weird sense of, Republicans are going to lie. I don't think Democrats should lie. I just think you should just tell the truth louder and more passionately.
Exactly. Like,
and sort of
being just as passionate with like things that are true as they are with things that are false, and also just as like, and drag them just as hard when they say shit that is obviously false. And like that. People need a little bit more.
Yeah, agreeing to disagree with anti-choice people. What has that ever gotten us other than now we're here and potentially losing abortion rights? So this is somewhat the more controversial, tedious part, but I feel like somewhat necessary to ask you, as someone who had supported the man who apparently is single-handedly responsible for the loss of abortion rights in America, Bernie Sanders. So how do you take that? Because I imagine it's annoying when it's already, I'm losing abortion rights. Oh, and now I'm being blamed for it.
I mean, I saw a weird amount of threads about like how anyone who even voted for him in the primary is responsible now. And it's just like, it's exhausting. And honestly, like, I hate to say it, but my take right now is like people are frustrated and saying ridiculous things, and saying ridiculous things like that is apparently making them feel better. I think it's boring. I don't think it's particularly compelling, but whatever gets you through the day at this point. They don't, I can't anymore. Like, that's fine. I'll do what I'm gonna do. I can't. Like,
Oh,
you know
yeah.
what? I consider abortion to be a healthcare issue, and I care about women dying from abortion. I also care about people, not having access to healthcare.
Yes.
That's a pretty big thing for me.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
want access to all healthcare for everyone, even terrible
Yeah,
Republicans.
as I'm sure is a surprise to many people, especially given my background. I'm a big fan of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and I remember a friend asking,
Oh yeah,
like, how can you even bear to watch the Rocky Horror Picture Show with that woman in it again? Susan Sarandon. And I was like, well, because it's a movie, and she is not
yeah.
really. She's not Janet Weiss. She's play, and and I've joked about it being. I mean, I've made the
I
joke
don't
before.
think
He said
they're
something
giving up
particularly
Thelma and
stupid,
Louise
right?
anytime soon for
Yeah,
real.
I mean, and I've made to me, it's like she said something stupid years ago, and I remember making that joke of like, this is tough, but like obviously joking, like because
Yeah,
she's an actor, and yeah, I guess to that point as well, the people who are obsessed with her, like what would usually happen is a Republican with kids in cages to this would happen,
yeah.
and someone, often a dude pundit or whatever, or even strong strident Hillary Clinton supporter would be like, well, what about the revolution now, Susan Sarandon? I'm like, well, okay, well, first off, now you're just sort of beating up on this old lady who's
Yeah.
kind of confused, whatever, fine, whatever we want to do. But let's take a step back. This is Susan Sarandon who made this controversy about maybe it's okay if Trump wins on Chris Hayes' show, which is not necessarily setting a knife. How is that setting the world on fire? And
I mean, here's the thing. It's a like what I do think a lot of people don't understand is that like in a lot of like radical thought in general, which is not something that I mean I'm fairly radical, but like this particular thing is not necessarily something I agree with. There's this idea based on like the Marxist rules of history that things need to get really bad so that people revolt and you know
oh yeah, I
start
mean, there's
on
legitimate theory.
the dictatorship of the proletariat and then socialism. And that's like it's not an unusual
Yeah,
tech if you're familiar with that at all. I don't happen to agree with it. I
yeah.
think it's probably a bad idea because I have to live now.
Certainly, bad people, poor people, most vulnerable people suffer during revolutions. But on the other hand, the Civil War, things had to get really bad for Black people were
Yeah,
enslaved. Like our human history does support that. Not saying that like I would love if other means, like maybe people would
yeah,
be like, hey, maybe we shouldn't
it would
have these
obviously be
slaves.
preferable.
But I don't think people just didn't naturally come to them. Maybe we shouldn't have slaves. This is really fucked up. What am I doing with my life? Like maybe I
Although,
should free these people.
although Republicans actually insist that I've seen so many conservatives argue that would have happened. They're like,
Uh,
it would have died out eventually. People would have just gotten tired of not having to pay their workers.
I don't. Well,
People are still
also like
not tired of not having to pay their workers.
yeah, no one ever gets tired of free labor. Like, can you imagine,
Like,
especially with technology, like you could just, all of every Walmart worker is a slave and works in
yeah,
basically a prison and then comes back, and it's like hard to imagine. But this idea of like, well, unless there's cotton to be picked, there's no slavery. It's like, I don't know. I think people are very lazy and very motivated to not have to work and to profit off the labor of others. The
yeah,
civil rights movement also very violent.
mhm.
People have to die
And
for
necessarily
that
so.
aspect, and to this whole concept of the revolution coming that Trump sparked was interesting and controversial. I know is that do, do Democrats win in 2018 without Trump, without that boogeyman? And if you look back, do they have, if
I,
there's a world where, and again, Rubio or Jeb could have won if Trump hadn't, we go back and forth on whether
I
or not
actually
that
don't
Hoover
think so.
beaten
I
her
think,
would have been Trump.
yeah.
Trump was the only one who could have beaten them. But there are people who
Mhm.
believe that. I guess what I'm saying is the same people who really, really dislike Sarandon's statements also believe that Trump underperformed the fundamentals, and that Hillary would have lost anyway. Trump just narrowly won, but Rubio would have won bigger. You and I disagree with that. But I'm saying the same people who say
Wait,
this
people
now
think
say
that? That's so cute.
that yes, that Trump underperformed the fundamentals. The only fully fundamental
Yeah.
is that it's very hard as a third party to win 3 terms of White House with the same party. But I don't see Rubio flipping the Rust Belt. That would seem tremendously
No. People
unlikely.
didn't. This is the thing. People wanted, like, Trump won because people were like, I want some kind of radical change. I'm super mad. And I think that, like, I don't think that any other Republican would have beaten Clinton. I just don't. None of them were, like, particularly compelling. And, like, the Republicans themselves didn't really care about any of them except for Cruz. Like, they were basically like, those are all rhinos. I could take or leave. They hated Jeb. They hated Rubio because they felt like he was, you know, a poser or a rhino or whatever. Like, that's not like
No, I mean,
Trump is the one who's going to win.
no one wants to acknowledge what happened in that year, being that it was a change election. There's very angry people sitting back, perhaps even further, the Tea Party, but specifically Occupy Wall Street, or whatever. Democrats got played. Trump capitalized on the anger. And to a certain degree, even Republicans during the primary were trying to do the same thing of, you're angry, but let me talk about Reagan some more. And here's the traditional stuff that I will do. Whereas Trump was really like, I feel your anger, and I, you know, build upon it. And
exactly. He yes-anded them.
So Sanders, I feel like, whatever you might think of this candidate, was not this. He was a. If you really hate Sanders, I feel like you should look at it still as he was a symptom of a weakness in the Democratic Party, being that it was not responding to this anger, especially amongst voters who, especially non-reward voters who might have like, there was no, this whole thing of, you know, we're going to win big in the suburbs. We're kind of running on what is essentially a conservative platform. People will say, no, it's very uber progressive because of all these things, which is true, but for specifically types of voters who had been voting for Democrats in the Rust Belt. So this assertion, when you are believing you have a blue wall, like, I don't think, to me, it's like, I don't go to a club thinking it's the Stephen Wall. Like, I'm, you know, my big days, man, I'm going to pick up the ladies at this club because it's the Stephen Wall. And I go there and it falls apart. Maybe I was mistaken and I should rethink it and not blame the guys who didn't, you know, meet people, because it's like, no, maybe I was thinking a lot of myself and I misplayed what was happening. But really, they believed there was a wall. I got criticized a lot by suggesting there was even a chance Trump could win. But how could he win? Obviously, he won't win Florida because he's mean to Mexicans, which is very racist if you explore that theory on any level. And he can't.
Oh, no, it's the whole, I know, once again, Democrats really think that those Cubans someday.
And he's going to win. Of course, he's going to win. And to the point, and I mean, I always go back to this. It's controversial, but when Tim Kaine was selected, I was like, okay, that's it. Because again, when do David, any sort of activist or any response, or Sherrod Brown or anyone reflect of like the feeling of what's going on? And I get the idea you couldn't have chosen Warren, but maybe Sherrod Brown or anyone, but to just choose a choice that is that is if you had not run against Sanders at all, that she had not lost Michigan, that there was no weakness in that area. There was pretending this never happened, and I'm going to choose Tim Kaine, which is not what Trump did. I mean, whoever in his campaign said you're going to choose, he didn't choose Chris Christie, he didn't choose Judge Judy or Janine, he chose Mike Pence, who was the most like the guy who came in second. That's usually what you sometimes do, right? And there was and with Sanders, Democrats are very much not trying to follow that rule of, we should probably pick someone like the guy we almost beat. I mean, that's usually what happens.
Think part of it was sort of like strategic, because the point was like there was a very big push to say, no, people don't actually want those things. They're being brainwashed by Bernie Sanders. And if he never brought any of those things up, people would not want them, and they would vote for Clinton and have no problem whatsoever. And I think that it was, you know, it was important for them to, I think they, to telegraph that and to be like, these people don't matter at all. And we're going to, like, they matter so little that we're going to go after Republicans in the suburbs. They're the ones who, are going to bring us on home. And I think, well, like, it is very important to some people to be like, no, these people are just, it's not that they actually believe in these things, but that they're being taken in by, a Pied Piper type person who is just incredibly charming, just
And
like Larry David.
And that's a right and a left thing, right? Like the right
Yeah.
insisting on calling Trump a con artist as if they've never seen a con artist movie, because Trump, who invests with Trump up front, like he's pretty much overtly bad. Like I think they want, he was like, here's what I'm giving you, and they took it. And I get this criticism of like, oh, well, Sanders was all about the economy and not about identity politics, which again is weird because then James Carville, well, then the good Democrats will now say Democrats are too woke and not focusing enough on the economy and not identity politics.
Well, no, they still don't want the economy. They still, like, that is still,
I guess, the wrong.
Generally, it's
But if ultimately the idea was that Stein voters were decisive in those 3 states, which is, you're talking about 1% as opposed to Obama had won Wisconsin, for instance. Paul Ryan was from. So that's the kind of ass kicking we're talking about. He beat Romney and Ryan in Wisconsin by 7 points. And then Trump wins it by under a point. That is not like, oh, well, look at all Jill Stein's voters. It's like, okay, well, what happened to these? But no one wants to talk about or blame the Obama-Trump voters. It's just the Stein voters, many of whom you're assuming are Democrats, but they're not. But even if you're saying they're suddenly that important, but they're only important when you want to blame them. They're not important enough to actually court. So going back to 2000 with Nader voters.
But I also don't think that anyone who is going to be voting for Jill Stein to begin with was like, I'm deciding between Jill Stein and Hillary Clinton, because no, they weren't. It's not, that was not a thing.
What did Susan Sarandon say? And that's why.
I also don't think that anyone was like, oh man, I was gonna vote for Hillary Clinton, but then Susan Sarandon, the lady from Rocky Horror and some other movies, like Thelma and Louise, she changed my mind. And and like, I understand people wanting to just like be like, yes, this is the biggest, most important thing in the world, but I do wish that people would hammer things, like other things, as hard as they hammer Susan. Like Susan Sarandon is trending every single day, and they're like that for this entire week. There are so many things that we could be yelling about that are not Susan Sarandon. Well, and I'm not saying everything I tweet is, super like.
Yeah. And politically, if you're saying that abortion was, and the Supreme Court was the uber important issue in 2016, it's disingenuous to me, because otherwise, if it was really that important, you would have tailored everything else to the, oh, Robyn, you're pro-choice, but here's all this other stuff you want that we're not giving you, but you're pro-choice. I can get you on this. All right, well, here's all this crazy Sanders stuff, whatever it takes, but I want your vote on this, as opposed to then being like, oh, these suburban Republicans who have wanted abortion overturned for decades, I guess you will vote for a Democrat because Trump is mean.
And because Tim Kaine thinks abortion is bad. Like, which does not actually help them.
Of those strategies, it seems like, oh, maybe Robyn's a more gettable vote. Okay, yeah, well, I mean, it's only human rights at stake. Maybe I can eliminate her student loan debt. Sure, I'll give her that. That's how negotiations work, right?
Yeah.
If I'm treating you seriously as a voter, it's like, okay, well, she's pro-choice. I can get her. I'll do this key issue that Sanders had or anyone had, and then but instead it was this idea of like, oh, and these suburban women who find Trump embarrassing and hate having to talk about Trump's grab him by the pussy to their kid. They're going to help Hillary Clinton win Texas, which didn't happen. because what happened was, yes, he's an asshole, but I want abortion banned. And so
Mhm.
that's how they voted. And that's what McConnell was gambling on. He knew when he held it. Like a lot of the people who are kind of, they'll definitely hold their noses and vote for them. So, but I agree. I mean, if I don't see it, but I get that people are frustrated and they're frustrated right now and they're going through this sort of situation. I just don't think it sort of changes anything. I think viewing this idea of like Democrats need to just ritually beat up Cori Bush and AOC and have multiple sister soldier moments, and that's the key to victory. I'm writing a piece about Steve Bullock, the Times, talking about apparently only coastal elites care about the climate change.
Yeah.
Because if you're working on trying to find ends meet, why are you worried about climate change? It's like, dude, you're the former governor of a state that was like dozens of homes caught on fire this weekend
Yeah.
because of climate change. So I think competent Democrats can try to explain how, okay, the reason that your house is on fire, the reason that groceries went up this summer because, seafood was in the Pacific Sound, the sound was literally
Mhm.
boiling alive from the heat, is all climate change. Is only going to get worse. It's going to get worse for you.
Yeah, instead of just being like, this is all the fault, like, because they're letting Republicans basically control the narrative of this is all the fault of shutdowns and lazy people not wanting to work because they can collect unemployment. Like,
yeah, I
and
think that's a much. It's if you're going to try to win these arguments, win them on that
mhm.
level of what's actually happening. But again, Bullock is one of those good Democrats that Republicans love to retweet, the never Trumpers of like, this is what you guys should be doing. And
Yeah,
even though he lost the the presidential nomination, he lost the Senate nomination. His style didn't work. Who knows? So
but like, this is my thing. I don't understand. Like, my thoughts together. I don't fully understand like why anyone is like, oh, you know what we should listen to? Republicans about who want us to lose about how to do stuff. Like, if I were to like if I were to say to Republicans, you could maybe get some, I'm not saying you could get our vote, but it would be a lot more reasonable if you stopped opposing abortion. You should do that. Maybe you'll get some more votes. Like, they would be like, fuck you. We don't, like, you're trying to make us get fewer votes because that's who votes for us.
yeah,
Like,
and
if,
Liz
stop
Cheney
taking
doesn't.
advice from the people who want you to lose. They're
Well, and
not always going to have your best interest at heart.
absolutely, and Liz Cheney or even Adam Kissinger or whatever few good Mitt Romney, they don't want Eli Mistel or Amanda Marcotte or Parker Malloy. They don't want those people sharing their op-eds and being like, good point. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my base
Yeah.
because Malloy likes or Robyn likes what I said. They want, but only it seems this world where Democrats are like, oh wow, I got a retweet from Tim Miller or Amanda Carpenter or people who like willingly worked for Jeb Bush. And that's the thing. I said I want to give off ramps to, and I give
Yeah.
off ramps to, sure, Tim Miller and Amanda Carpenter. These are people who worked for both Cruz and Jeb, and so I think what's important to then point out to the very people who want to burn Susan Sarandon in effigy
Yeah.
is that you're okay. Well, as much as you dislike Susan Sarandon, one of your favorite retweets when I see you on Twitter, your favorite retweets are from people like Tim Miller, Amanda Carpenter, people who worked for Jeb and Cruz, who would have gotten us to this exact end game.
Yeah.
Those are the people they would have nominated. And and I got some pushback when I said like Nancy Pelosi shouldn't be talking about needing a strong Republican Party because a strong Republican Party wins
Yeah.
elections. And so if we're saying that even after 2 terms, right? Because this is what the average voter might think, right? Hey,
Mhm.
Democrats, Obama had it for 2 terms, and let's let
Yeah.
Republicans do things. It's like sharing. Like, okay,
Yeah.
you and I are sharing governance. It's a human
Mhm.
instinct. So, okay, well, it's Robin's turn to host, except that when
Mhm.
and Steven's turn to host, except when I'm
Yeah.
hosting, no one gets all their human rights are stripped away.
Yeah.
That's a party. Maybe he shouldn't host. Maybe only Robyn should host. And if that's the argument, you need to make that an affirmative case. And if you're not making that argument, if you're isolating Trump as a problem, then 2020, you do get these down ballot losses to people like Nancy Mace, who present as Republicans, country club Republicans. And it's not because of defund, and it's not because of socialism, Abigail Spanberger. It's because you, Abigail Spanberger, aren't sounding along. You're too busy punching to the left.
They're not calling they're not a threat. They're okay. The reason, and I do feel like sometimes focusing so much on like how the kooky ones are a threat. So like, and I do that sometimes when I'm tired, honestly, or I'm recovering from a booster shot. I feel like focusing so much on the overt crazy is maybe like sort of presenting like, oh, well, if they don't act like a, lunatic, then maybe they're okay. So
now it's
worse. That's something I need to work on maybe. But
now, I mean, look, we're only in it for the clicks. And
yes.
They get most of the clicks. Well, I mean, Nancy Mace is usually, a lot of these people, what's weird is when they do something for press, it's because when they're trying to act like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert,
oh yeah,
something. So it winds up.
I will say, I think that she represents a lot of, she represents the Republican base, and I think that she currently represents what most of the Republican Party actually thinks, and does provide a jumping off point to discuss those things, like cancer being contagious.
Yes. I mean, I think that there's a sense of politeness. I've been in that way myself, of like, I want everything to be not, I don't like the politeness. I don't like this, but like Lauren Boebert's overt anti-Muslim rhetoric, and Marjorie Taylor Greene's overt fat phobia, which is really when Republicans are polite. There was a world where, even they talk about the great days of non-cancel culture. You understand of like, oh, Eddie Murphy had a great stand-up set, and even if as a kind of stupid 12-year-old you were repeating some of the homophobic jokes, it was understood that they were not polite. This is not a world where necessarily gays were treated with respect. It was understood that those jokes were not polite. And if you said that joke in front of your teacher, and again, this is South Carolina, 1987, right? But it was understood if you said... Are we
speaking from personal experience, Stephen? No.
But if you were to reference any of his stuff, his misogyny, whatever, it would be, that's wrong. You should not say that.
Yeah.
It's inappropriate. And that woman could be, your teacher could have voted for Reagan or whatever. It was understood that this is... But now it's like what Trump... I do get that what Trump opened, and then what you get with March, the kind of the cruelty, because then it's like, if a teacher's like, oh, you shouldn't be overtly anti-Muslim or overtly transphobic. Now she's not like just saying this is just impolite and wrong, which is a teacher do. They are now basically saying it from it's now politicized. It's basically, oh, this Democrat, liberal, communist teacher, they told me I can't in class say that I can't call my Muslim classmate a jihad squad, because otherwise, like, how is that, a congressman?
What about mine? Although I will tell you, for reasons I don't feel like getting into, basically I went to school full of assholes. I had kids in my 7th grade class regularly going around screaming racial slurs and Heil Hitler in my direction, basically because I had said, hey, don't use those words. And the response from the administration and faculty in liberal Massachusetts was, they're just expressing their freedom of speech, and you're the one who's wrong here because you told them not to use racial slurs or scream them at people on the bus. It's not that new, quite frankly.
No. That also reminds me of during the primaries as well, so we can tie this up about the presidents. I think people like Chris Hayes as well, expressing shock that Donald Trump won without, pretty decisively, the Republican primary in Massachusetts. And it was Chris. Someone had said that Massachusetts is like, well, okay, even with all of my Goodwill Hunting experience, it is not that shocking that Donald Trump would win a Republican primary in Massachusetts. And this
No.
idea that somehow it's this uber, like not all the state is like,
Yeah, no.
even
People
Boston, like
forget
New
that
York has a
about
reputation.
busing and like
Yeah.
I mean, my horrible town was actually like they went Trump entirely, and also also they were in love. My actual address is shown in Lovecraft Country as like here's where the weird cult is. Like my address growing up, so like people know that like not every place in Massachusetts is fabulously liberal.
Yeah. It's all just Kennedy world. How could that
Yeah,
possibly have happened? Um, so
not everyone went to Harvard. Oh my God.
so
Like, sorry.
so sending us home for the week, Robyn, what's some final thoughts and before we end off or
Hmm. I I don't really have any. Sorry, I didn't even think about that. Oh, here, my final thought is everyone here admire my amazing scarf that
is this now an
it's
infomercial or are you
amazing.
selling?
It is an Alexander Wang scarf that I got at a resale shop. It's huge. It's a silk Alexander Wang scarf that I got at a resale shop for $65. And normally they're like 300 to 400. And I'm just
There's a
really
number
excited. There are skulls all over it. It's great. I would marry it.
It does look very nice. I think that's great. I
Mhm.
I
And
have
for the people who think I'm shallow.
there's nothing
But
shallow about clothing, as Miranda Priestly
you know what?
stated in the very
Fashion is a part of my feminism, and I'm gonna just say it's not actually true. I just really like it. But no, it's funny. Like people are like, "Oh my God, she's touching her face. Clearly, she's very vain." And I'm like, "My face is itchy, and I can't figure out where to itch it because I'm backwards."
it's legitimate. It's legitimate request. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much, Robyn. Thanks everyone. We will be back next week with God knows what's going to be happening, but we will try to sort through it. So like, subscribe, share. We'll catch you on the other side. Thank you.
I can't even figure out where the